Hello guys, welcome back to our anime moments. Guys, please like the video and subscribe to my channel. Today is explanation of Absolute Resonance Part 11 based on novel. So let's start. The uproar beneath the stage continued until Loulan was quickly carried away on a stretcher. Despite the din dying down, looks of complete astonishment and horror were still levied upon Li Luo. They were terrified by Li Luo's absolutely merciless blow. Li Luo was speechless at this, silently cursing that bastard Loulan. That vagrant had dragged his name through the mud. As he stood on the stage, his gaze swept the four directions before finally pausing on a particular seat. Song Yunfeng was sitting right there with a group of friends, gaily chatting. When he noticed Li Luo's stare, he raised his head and returned him an indifferent look before continuing with what he was doing. Li Luo was also uninterested in giving him a piece of his mind, so he turned to leave. "Brother Luo, you are truly ferocious. Even Loulan was ruined by you," Jiang Qing'e praised as he ran over. "That brat is just putting on a show." Li Luo had a good understanding of his opponent's strength, and if they had continued brawling, he might be the eventual victor, but that would have taken quite a while. Judging by today's results, his current battle strength was on par with that of a 7th seal. Entering the top 20 would not be a problem. All that remained were the last two battles tomorrow. If he was able to win both, he would definitely enter the top 20 and could finally take a breather. It was said that once the top 20 had been determined, they could choose to continue battling to determine their ranking amongst the group. Li Luo was not interested in this competition, as simply being one of the 20 meant he would be qualified to participate in the college final examinations. Thus, there was no need to engage in this meaningless battle. If he had time, he'd much rather practice refining spirit liquids and purifying lights. After the battles for the day ended, Li Luo did not immediately leave the academy, as the pairings for the battles on the following day would be released soon. He wanted to know who he would be up against. Luckily, he did not have to wait long, as an hour later, a metallic ringing resounded throughout the field. Li Luo and Jiang Qing'e both made their way to a stone pillar. The stone pillar was surrounded by numerous students, and Li Luo quickly glanced over the flowing characters on the projection screen. Very quickly, he managed to find his opponents for the next day. His first opponent was a 7th seal student from the first school. This opponent was known to be significantly weaker than Loulan and would not pose a threat to him. Unfortunately, when he discovered who his second opponent was, his gaze gradually narrowed into a squint. "Brother Luo. What a disaster. Your final opponent is Song Yunfeng." Jiang Qing'e cried out almost involuntarily when he discovered Li Luo's opponent. Indeed, Li Luo's final opponent was the second strongest student in the first school, Song Yunfeng. Some of the other students had also heard the commotion, and pitiful looks fell upon him. Although Li Luo had recently managed to make a comeback, even managing to beat Loulan today, it looked as though his lucky streak had ended. Song Yunfeng is apparently at the 8th seal. Shit. It doesn't get unluckier than this, Jiang Qing'e sighed as he also felt pity towards Li Luo. Li Luo, on the other hand, didn't seem too concerned. None of those that have survived till the end are weaklings. It's not that unusual to encounter him. No worries. Even if you lose a round tomorrow, your place in the top 20 is basically set in stone, Jiang Qing'e said, intending to console Li Luo. Although Li Luo smiled and nodded upon hearing those words, his eyes held a trace of gloominess. No one knew exactly what he was thinking. On the other side of the field, Song Yunfeng had also managed to identify his opponents for the next day. Upon seeing that his opponent was going to be Li Luo, he stared at the screen for a good half a minute in a daze before revealing a vicious smile. "You've had such a glum face the entire time today, yet you're suddenly smiling? Why the change?" Differ Qing, who had been following him around, asked curiously. "Well, that is because I finally get to face off against an opponent that brings me joy. I never thought heaven would grant me my greatest wish." Song Yunfeng beamed. At this point, Differ Qing noticed Song Yunfeng's opponent for tomorrow. "Wow, so it's going to be Li Luo? I suppose that's normal since both of you have had a streak of victories. The chances of this happening weren't small." However, His luck isn't great. His winning streak ends now, I suppose, Xia Qing'e replied, slightly shocked. She had a clear understanding of Song Yunfeng's might, and Lu Qing'e was the only student in South Wind Academy with the strength to suppress him. Even though Li Luo had finally started to ascend to the skies, there was still an insurmountable gap between him and Song Yunfeng. She could already imagine the scene of tomorrow's battle. It would be no different from crushing dried and rotten branches underfoot for Song Yunfeng. Furthermore, she also knew that Song Yunfeng absolutely detested Li Luo, whether it was due to personal matters or the struggle between their families. Thus, as soon as the battle commenced, Song Yunfeng would utilize the quickest measures to savagely crush Li Luo, bashing him into the ground. For a brief moment, Xia Qing'e even felt a trace of pity for Li Luo. The result was already predetermined. However, Li Luo truly had it coming. If he knew that Song Yunfeng liked Lu Qing'e, why had he not distanced himself from her? After all, an envious man that had been provoked would not act rationally. Li Luo, on the other hand, left the academy as soon as he saw who his opponents were for the next day. Jiao Qing'e could only say goodbye with a look of sympathy on his face. Whilst on the carriage back, Li Luo's eyes were closed as he remained deep in thought. The battle with Song Yunfeng the next day would be unimaginably difficult. The opponent was at the 8th seal and possessed significantly denser resonant power. Furthermore, he also had a 7th grade Crimson Eagle resonance. 7th to 9th grade resonances were considered high grade, and thus Song Yunfeng's resonance fell in that category. One should not underestimate what a high-grade resonance was capable of. The power produced by a 7th grade resonance was not the same realm as middle grade or low grade resonances. The resonant power was denser and also possessed some form of spirituality. Spirituality was a difficult concept to explain. It was something that was ephemeral and could only be experienced when it was used on one's opponents. Thus, the 7th grade could be considered to be a watershed. Those who could cross this gap would be in possession of an almighty resonance. Additionally, within the threshold of a high-grade resonance, they were also further classified into upper and lower distinctions. This was not applicable for 1st to 6th grade resonances, and it allowed one to better differentiate the potential within these high-grade resonances. Song Yunfeng's Crimson Eagle resonance was a lower 7th grade. Thus, regardless of resonant power or resonance grade, Li Luo was one step behind Song Yunfeng, and this battle was clearly not in his favor. No one had high hopes for the battle between the two. Even Li Luo himself was no exception. This is truly very troublesome, Li Luo mumbled to himself. Although his waterlight resonance was unique in its own way, it was still only a 5th grade resonance. Even though the spirit liquids and purifying lights refined by it were not inferior to what a 7th grade resonance could refine, this was not applicable in the context of a battle. His resonance was unlikely to have any advantages in a head-on collision. If he could somehow temper the waterlight resonance to the 6th grade by tomorrow, he would definitely feel less pressure. Despite constantly chewing through his supply of spirit liquids and purifying lights, he had still been unable to increase the grade. More time was needed, and this was not enough to put out the inferno burning at his gate. Should I just concede instantly? Li Luo scratched his head. This was honestly a possible choice. No matter how he considered the situation, this was the most normal and expected potion. Everyone knew of the huge gap between the two and that it was basically uncrossable. If he knew the result but still persisted, would that not make him a masochist? Li Luo continued to ponder. He had no plans to visit Sun Creek Villa today, so he went straight home. Even if there was no alternative choice, he would still prepare himself for the worst. When the next day came, Cai Wei greeted Li Luo, who had just arisen. He looked absolutely terrible, with black eye circles and sluggish movements. It was as though he had not slept well the previous night. What's wrong? Didn't sleep well? Cai Wei asked with concern. Li Luo shook his head and smiled. The academy has been having their preliminary examinations recently, and I think the stress has gotten to me. He didn't want to mention the situation of him having to face off against Song Yunfeng today. There wasn't any point. Cai Wei nodded knowingly, and her radiant and beautiful egg-shaped face had an encouraging expression. Do your best. I'm sure you can do it, Oh, Yang Linqing asked about you yesterday. It seems that you didn't go to the Sun Creek Villa? While hurriedly stuffing several mouths of porridge into his mouth, Li Luo garbled, please let her know that once my preliminary examinations are done, I will spend more effort on resonance smithing. If she wants to find me for a chat, I will be more than pleased to do so then. Cai Wei smiled mischievously. Why did you not tell her personally? I was afraid she might beat me to death, Li Luo answered honestly before devouring his breakfast. After waving goodbye, he quickly ran off. Seeing this scene, Cai Wei could only shrug helplessly as she watched Li Luo escape, wryly shaking her head. After which, she continued to have her breakfast as though nothing had happened, slowly chewing and enjoying it. Li Luo. As Li Luo made his way to Southwind Academy, he heard a familiar, clear, and crisp voice behind him. Turning around, he saw the good-looking and immaculate Lu Qing'e sitting right beneath a massive viridescent tree. Lu Qing'e was currently wearing a black, short-skirted academy uniform. This coupled with her snow-white skin made the sight of her even more attractive. Her thin waist and short skirt further accentuated her slender legs. She was so eye-catching that everyone who was in the vicinity would furtively glance at her every so often. Li Luo, hearing her greeting, immediately walked over and gave a casual smile. I heard you're going to be facing off against Song Yunfeng today. Lu Qing'e asked as her brows knitted together in a frown. Li Luo could only nod in response. What do you plan to do? Lu Qing'e asked. Li Luo paused for a moment before frankly responding. I'll probably just give up on the fight. Hearing this response, Lu Qing'e gave a light laugh, but there was no intention to mock him. Instead, she only seriously nodded. That is a very logical decision. There is no need for you to prove yourself against him. With your talent in the resonance arts, the gap between you two will lessen in time. I feel the same way too. At this point, Lu Qing'e became slightly silent and solemn. I'd like to apologize for what has happened. I think that part of the reason why the situation has devolved to such an extent is because of me. Li Luo smiled. Well, honestly, you're barely the problem. It mostly has to do with the relationship between House Loulan and the Song family. Of course, I think the bigger reason is that Song Yunfeng is afraid. Afraid? Lu Qing'e's almond-shaped eyes blinked curiously. Li Luo gave an insipid smile. Well, he's afraid that I will return to that form I had in the past. If that were to happen, he would forever live in my shadow and all of his effort throughout the years would go to waste. People would ridicule him. If anyone else heard these words, they would think that Li Luo had a screw loose in his head. Furthermore, the Song Yunfeng of today had much more influence and standing in the academy than Li Luo. Lu Qing'e, on the other hand, looked pensive. She was extremely clear about how outstanding and exceptional Li Luo was in his prime. Even now she found it hard to match up to him, much less Song Yunfeng. So, he wants to firmly suppress and completely crush you before you are able to mature? This also serves to fortify his own confidence. Lu Qing'e asked. Most likely. Li Luo nodded. If this is the case, then he won't let you give up so easily, Lu Qing'e commented. I hope he won't do that. If that's the case, Li Luo mumbled. Following which, he waved goodbye to Lu Qing'e and walked in the direction of the second school, where he heard some indistinct shouts. Then I will have no other choice. Lu Qing'e stared at his leaving silhouette, slightly shocked as Li Luo didn't seem to be pushed to his wits' end. Perhaps he had some other means to avoid the fight with Song Yunfeng? Li Luo's first fight ended without any surprises. The second battle was organized as the final fight of the preliminary examinations. It seemed as though it was set up to be a fitting finale to the examination. The field was a hubbub of voices and shouts whilst innumerable students crowded around it. On the upper platform sat Dean Wei Shaw and the rest of the teachers, ready to watch the battle. Keek! Who would have expected Li Luo to clash with Song Yunfeng? Do you think there will even be a fight? Dean Wei gave a lengthy laugh. Lin Feng put on an indifferent smile. What sort of meaning is there in such a pointless battle? Xu Shanyu sighed darkly. There might not even be a battle. This is completely imbalanced, and an instant forfeit would be best. There's no need to fight and humiliate himself. Although Li Luo was from the second school and Xu Shanyu was extremely biased towards him, the odds were clearly stacked against Li Luo. The gap was large, and it seemed impossible. The old dean nodded as he sighed. Li Luo has already entered the ranks of the top 20. This already demonstrates his exceptional speed in catching up. If he was given more time, reaching Song Yunfeng's level would not be difficult. However, with how little time there has been, he is still lacking. As they continued to banter, the atmosphere came to a head as the appointed time of battle approached silently. Song Yunfeng got up from his seat and confidently floated atop the battle stage. His upright posture and handsome face seemed to create an image of a heroic warrior. When Song Yunfeng took the field, enthusiastic cheers resounded throughout. One could see his exceptional reputation and fame within the academy by looking at the crowd's display of excitement. On the other half of the field, Li Luo also gradually made his way atop the stage under the watchful eyes of the crowd. Wow, he's so handsome. He's even better looking than that Yunfeng guy. Although Li Luo did not make any fancy moves when entering the stage, numerous girls immediately screamed their heads off when he stood atop the battle stage. He had inherited his parents' excellent genes and he truly was top-notch when it came to appearances. Relatively speaking, Song Yunfeng looked like a peasant standing next to royalty. Comparatively speaking, the two individuals atop the battle stage had tuned out all of these extraneous elements and focused their minds on their upcoming fight. Li Luo stared at Song Yunfeng directly as he raised his hand. Before he could speak, Song Yunfeng dully asked, "Are you planning to give up?" Li Luo smiled. "Are you planning to humiliate me with words? So that my hot-headedness will lead me into a direct clash with you?" Song Yunfeng's eyelid twitched upon hearing this blunt accusation. He indifferently replied, "I will not humiliate you. I just think that your parents must be proud of a son like you, bringing them fame with your courageous moves." With that provocation, the entire field turned silent. Who would have thought that Song Yunfeng's words would be so blunt and insidious? Li Luo was also a little stunned upon hearing those words. Following which, he gave Song Yunfeng a thumbs up. Truly amazing. This is truly a single fatal blow. Well, since it's come to this. At this point, Li Luo started to stretch his neck muscles and cracked his knuckles. Immediately after, he rushed at Song Yunfeng with a toothy smile. The only thing was that his pearly white grin seemed to be filled with a trace of ruthlessness. "Come on, then, Song family son of AB*TCH. I'll give you one chance to fight. Let's see if you're good enough to take a bite out of me." Once Li Luo made that insult, everyone here knew that he was not planning to back out. He would clash with Song Yunfeng head-on. However, this collision would be akin to smashing an egg against a rock. There was no hope. Brother Luo, on the side of the second school, numerous fellow classmates were fraught with worry. Jiang Qing'e especially was constantly pounding his fist in anxiety. "Song Yunfeng, you bastard! That's such a low blow." Everyone else nodded in agreement. Song Yunfeng had clearly resorted to underhanded means to provoke Li Luo, truly shameless. Within the crowd was a certain Yu Lang. He was still lying on a bed, tightly wrapped all over in bandages. In order to demonstrate his professionalism in acting out his role, he remained tightly bedridden, but even then, he would not miss this show, opting to have his bed dragged near the stage. What is Li Luo trying to do? Does he want to be abused? Not far away, Lu Qing'e was also observing the machinations on the stage. Her face was wreathed in a dark frown. She had expected Song Yunfeng to throw out some taunts in order to incite Li Luo. However, even then she did not think that he would target Li Luo's two missing Duke stage parents. Clearly, Li Luo held a deep sense of gratitude and respect for his parents. Even though he could shrug off insults towards him, he would never let anyone else tarnish his parents' names and honor. Frankly speaking, Song Yunfeng did not possess any right or stature to even attempt to smear the dukes. However, when faced with this situation, Li Luo was unwilling to take it sitting down. Lu Qing'e gaze swept across the battle stage, eventually resting upon Li Luo. At this point, the thought struck her. Had Li Luo really been forced into a confrontation with Song Yunfeng because of those words? On the stage, Song Yunfeng's icy glare was focused on Li Luo. The phrase, "Song family's son of a bitch," uttered in front of the entire audience had also caused him to feel incensed. Despite that, he did not continue to spar with verbal barbs. That was pointless. He would wait for the battle to begin, then he would completely thrash Li Luo. The best retort would be to literally step on Li Luo's face in front of all. Once the administrators had confirmed that neither of the two parties were planning to forfeit, they solemnly announced the commencement of the final fight. Bang! The moment the start of the fight was declared, Song Yunfeng immediately summoned all of his crimson-red resonant power, sheer energy blasting into the skies. Within the resonant power, one could vaguely see the form of a crimson eagle materializing. This was Song Yunfeng's 7th grade resonance, which specialized in blazing heat and berserk power. Song Yunfeng did not hold back at all, his 8th seal cultivation demonstrated for all to see. A suppressive atmosphere also exuded from him, directly oppressing one's spirit. On the other side, Li Luo similarly channeled all of his resonant power. Blue resonant power that looked like the waves of the sea wrapped around his entire body. Directly comparing the strength and density of resonant power, it was obvious to the audience that Song Yunfeng held a significant advantage. This directly caused the mood to turn slightly gloomy. Just how could Li Luo overturn such a stark disadvantage? Impossible. At this moment, Li Luo placed both his palms in front of him in a stance. The blue resonant power around his body gradually started to ripple, and everyone could see that he was activating his oft-used 9-layered jade waves. The 9-layered jade wave's weakness was that it required a period of time for it to reach its peak. Unfortunately, Song Yunfeng wouldn't just sit around and twiddle his thumbs while this happened. HMPH. Song Yunfeng, who noticed this, immediately snorted. He circulated the crimson-red resonant power around him whilst he explosively shot towards Li Luo. A bolt of crimson light lanced across the stage with speed akin to a cannonball entrapped within a fiery tornado. A leg lashed downwards like a fiery hammer, directly chopping down towards Li Luo. Song Yunfeng was not planning to play around, and immediately exerted his full strength. His only desire was to launch a blitz of attacks, quickly trampling Li Luo beneath him. Facing Song Yunfeng's ferocious and merciless assault, Li Luo immediately started brandishing his palms in a circular motion, his water resonance power directly forming a water curtain to defend against the attack. Wang! Unsurprisingly, when faced with Song Yunfeng's berserk resonant power, the water curtain immediately gave way like a piece of paper. A simple touch of his moves directly shattered Li Luo's paltry defense, and the 9-layered jade waves followed suit right after. Song Yunfeng's absolutely tyrannical force had completely crushed Li Luo's attempt with a simple move. A dull thud resounded when Song Yunfeng's foot made contact, shockwaves rippling immediately after. Li Luo, on the other hand, was directly knocked flying tens of meters away, almost out of the stage and disqualified. Hua! The entire crowd gasped at this scene. This was only the first exchange, and the stark difference in strength was evident. Song Yunfeng completely suppressed Li Luo. Even though he had excellent talent in the resonance arts, it was useless against absolute might. Lu Qing'e's pretty face looked grave at this moment. Even with her breadth of experience, she saw no way for Li Luo to make a comeback. Don't give up, brother Song. Beat him up. On the other side of the stadium, Bei Kuan and Diffa Qing were currently standing with a group of Song Yunfeng's friends. Bei Kuan was cheering agitatedly at this point. Diffa Qing was silent though, only shaking her head in response. The gap between the two was just too vast. There was no chance to turn things around. On the stage, Li Luo's fists were stained with some crimson-red energy. He immediately willed icy-blue resonant power to surge out and extinguish the crimson-red residue. Vapor hissed into the sky when the two energies clashed, and Li Luo slowly savored the burning pain. He finally had an understanding of how strong Song Yunfeng was. This level of strength? A glint flickered through Li Luo's eyes. Who? Yet at this point, Song Yunfeng was not planning to give Li Luo any chance for rest. He immediately launched a vicious assault, akin to a hawk attacking its prey. The air whistled as his swift moves swept towards Li Luo. Li Luo raised his head and saw a crimson light rapidly approaching him. He was right at the edge of the battlefield, and if he was not careful, it would be the end of the game there and then. However, his expression did not hold any trace of worry, nor did he seem demoralized. He took a deep breath and immediately activated his water resonance power. Executing certain hand seals, a resonance arc took shape. A faintly blue water curtain took form in front of him, looking vaguely like a thin mirror. Some of the audience immediately recognized the move. High-grade resonance art, water mirror art. Lu Qing'e's eyes briefly lit up. The water mirror art was a defensive resonance art that did not possess much defensive power. Instead, it was able to reflect a portion of the opponent's attack to mitigate the damage. However, the water mirror art alone would be unable to even slightly hinder Song Yunfeng's savage and cruel flurry of blows. In that brief moment, Song Yunfeng had already pounced right in front of Li Luo. Staring at the thin water curtain, a trace of ridicule and coldness could be seen in his gaze. Li Luo might have a wide repertoire of resonance arts, but if he thought that a mere water mirror art was going to stop him, then he was truly too naive. After which, Song Yunfeng mustered even more power and punched outwards. The fist that rushed towards Li Luo was like a screaming red eagle eager to devour its prey. At the moment the blow was about to strike the water curtain, Song Yunfeng could vaguely make out a blurry humanoid shadow within the mirror. This reflection was also simultaneously lashing out against him with a crimson-colored fist. The two fists collided, and he could feel his fist punching through the water curtain as well. Bang! At this point, a low rumble could be heard. When the resonant power energies collided, they created a tempest that swept away all of the debris around them, scattering it in every direction. Li Luo's body was shaken and he was forced back 2 steps. Just another step would cause him to fall off the stage. However, no one was focused on that. Instead, their attention was all placed upon Song Yunfeng, who seemed to have received a massive backlash from his attack. He had actually been knocked back countless tens of steps, barely stabilizing himself. Immediately looking up, Song Yunfeng's face was full of shock. He had actually been pushed back? How did Li Luo's water mirror art possess such terrifying recoil strength? The rebounded energy had reached a level equal to 70% of Song Yunfeng's previous move. This was in a realm of power completely impossible for an ordinary water mirror art to attain. Hua! The audience erupted in endless uproar and astonishment at this scene. Song Yunfeng, on the other hand, had an expression of uncertainty as he viciously scowled at Li Luo. Li Luo's water mirror art was truly damn strange. This video will end here.